Morning, everyone, from the ODI here in central London. Lovely to see you all here today. We're here for the webinar on the National Data Library. You've moved away from I've got Joe sitting next to me, a colleague. So this is the topic, Shaping the National Data Library, Key Considerations for the Age of AI. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so just a couple of housekeeping issues to let everybody know about. The webinar is being recorded today and it's going to be shared by social media. So if you can't stay for the whole thing, or if you're somebody who have a colleague that might want to listen to this, then they can catch up afterwards. And we'll be letting people know about that on our email and social channels. We might use quotes and little extracts from the recording for future ODI communications as well. And if you'd like to ask questions. There's actually, you can't see them, but there's actually three of us here in the room, and I've got David next to me. He's going to be taking in any of your questions, which we can then put to our panel. And if you've got any other queries in the course of the event, the team's also available in the chat for any of those other queries. So if we move on to the next slide. So we've actually got a bit of a bumper panel today. We have four expert speakers who I'm delighted to welcome. I'm going to slightly go in a different order of slides there. Start with Eleanor. So Eleanor Simpel is the ODI's Director of Research and Professor of Computer Science at King's College London. Eleanor's research is in human-centric AI, exploring socio-technical questions around the management, use, and governance of data in AI applications. According to A Minor, she is in the top 100 most influential scholars in knowledge engineering of the last decade, and also features in the Women in AI 2000 rankings. And in her career, Ella has led 14 national and international research projects, contributing to a further 26. She leads the ODI's programme of research on data-centric AI, which studies and designs the socio-technical data infrastructure of AI models and applications. And Eleanor has chaired several conferences in artificial intelligence, social computing, and data innovation. And she's co-authored a number of papers on the National Data Library. So welcome to you,
Very happy
Eleanor.
to be.
Great to have you. And on to Anastasia. So you're going to correct me if I get this wrong, Anastasia, but Anastasia Bektimirova is the head of science and technology at the Entrepreneurs Network. Did I do okay?
Perfect.
Good. So Anastasia recently co-authored a joint paper with Tony Blair Institute, Governing in the Age of AI, Building Britain's National Data Library, which outlines recommendations for the government on the strategy and implementation of the NDL. So previously a senior researcher at Onward, she co-authored a report on how the UK can build a strategic advantage in critical technologies, which proposed establishing the British Library for Data to remove systemic barriers to data access. I think it was probably the first paper that we saw that introduced this concept that we're going to be talking about today. And at that time, they called for ensuring high quality data, including AI-ready public sector data, should be safely and efficiently used by scientists and private sector innovators, while enhancing public services and maintaining public trust, some themes that we've seen repeated in the literature since then. I'm also really pleased to welcome James Lamming. He is the Global Vice President of Operations at Ovation Data. James specialises in solving complex data management challenges. He leads a global team that supports clients in the oil and gas, heritage, and biotechnology sectors to achieve clean, structured, organised data sets that can be used to make critical business decisions and improve access. And James's proudest achievement, they've got some amazing stories down there at Ovation Data, and James's proudest achievement is helping NASA to recover critical satellite telemetry data for NASA's 1969 Mars Mariner 7 mission, which is really big tape, isn't it, James? Which led to the confirmation of the landing site of the Pathfinder Sojourner rover. So quite significant, and that's just one of a number of findings that have come about from the data that James and his company have digitized. And then finally, last but certainly not least on our panel is Henry Lee. Henry is a senior policy advisor in health policy at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Henry's an expert in global health and health security. His specialty lies at the intersection of health and innovation policies. Henry provides insight, analysis, and support to help global leaders prepare for the health challenges of tomorrow, of which there are a myriad. And his research centres on advancing biotechnological innovations to catalyse advancements in health, economic prosperity, and security. Henry is part of the Global Health Security Consortium, TBI's joint venture with Ellison Institute for Transformative Medicine, and a team of scientists at the University of Oxford. Wow, have we got some brain power with us today? That is amazing. So I'm not envisioning having much to say today other than to be the question master. So I'm excited for the first question. So the National Data Library, which is what we're all here to talk about. What is it, or should it be? And I'm going to come in turn on this question to Anastasia, Henry, James, and finish up with Eleanor on this one. So Anastasia, the National Data Library, what is it, or should it be?
Thank you for this introduction. So the National Data Library is a manifesto commitment of the new Labour government. Since the general election, there has been hardly any publicly announced news about it. What we know is that the NDL is currently in a scoping, exploratory phase, and there is a team in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology working on it. That said, we have at least 5 government policy papers to draw on where the National Data Library has been mentioned, as well as at least 30 references in Parliament. And taken together, this offers a pretty consistent, though still quite limited, picture. The Blueprint for Modern Digital Government, which is a government policy paper released at the end of January, has probably one of the most recent mentions of the National Data Library. And that document says that the National Data Library will make it easier to find and reuse data across different public sector entities to enhance government capabilities and also open up that data to innovators in industry, including startups, researchers in academia, and the document also mentions non-profits. And all of that will be to accelerate innovation, including AI-driven work, and to boost economic growth. And a close variation of that vision also featured in the Industrial Strategy Green Paper and the Autumn Budget as well. And a somewhat related development took place a couple of weeks ago. A content store for education data was launched, which pulls curriculum guidance, anonymized pupil assessments, and similar data, which is enabling AI tools to provide feedback on student work and also generate lesson plans and workbooks that can be reliably used in schools to reduce teacher workload. And even though that education content store is not explicitly linked to the National Data Library, the DC Secretary of State, Peter Kyle, said that the program was a really good example of the kind of gathering of data together and the use of that data that will ultimately be something the National Data Library will enable. So this is the kind of innovation that the NDL could scale across multiple sectors. So I think taken together, this is kind of where we are at in terms of National Data Library today.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Anastasia, for that update. I think that one of the challenges is actually knowing what is and is in scope and what's out of scope. And actually, what we've seen is the stakeholders within the ecosystem making lots of useful suggestions as to what should be in the National Data Library, but very little to date coming out of DCIP, the centre of government. So it's, you know, I guess that's a good thing in a way that it allows all of us to make recommendations, but it can be a little bit challenging in knowing, you know, how broad or narrow the focus of the NDL is going to be. Speaking of which, Henry, I'm really interested in your thoughts on health data. and whether health data should be included in the National Data Library or not, whether it should be included from the get-go, whether it's something that should come further down the line. I wonder if you could just focus a little bit on the health data aspects of the NDL.
Thank you, Emma. And to build on the points that Anastasia is making and what you've said, indeed, there's been a lot of encouraging movement and progress on the health data side, whether or not health would be a strand and when, as part of the NDL, that is to be seen. But then what I can bring into the discussion today is some perspective on those developments, and that might help us understand a little bit of what might NDL do in relation to health as well. So my work at TBI covers a wide range of topics, including health data, biotech, capital markets, and industrial strategy. And the thinking is that it's very simple, right? It comes from the premise, look, there's a bunch of really good stuff out there. There's a lot of good data out there. How can we use that to deliver better outcomes for the citizen in the health case, better health outcomes, drive innovation, and also boost the economy? And in terms of what the NDL should be, when we look at the health situation, the situation is that despite having such a good amount of health data that should be used for boosting those kind of purposes, they're really fragmented. They're everywhere. There is no easy way for trusted researchers to use them, access them in a trustful way to deliver the innovations that people need. And to that regard, TBI last year wrote a paper in collaboration with Lord Patrick Vallance. At that point, he was a strategic counselor for TBI. And in collaboration with Lord Vallance, we built out an idea called the National Data Trust. The idea is actually quite simple. Look, there is a way to discover the data now due to the fantastic work of our colleagues in Health Data Research UK. It's called HDR UK Gateway, and you can discover the data, but you can only see it, you can't actually access it. There are really promising movements in the NHS building on the progress of secure data environments where people can access the data but not take the data away. So how do we bring this together? What we are proposing is a concierge service. Look, you can discover the data through the pathway, and through the concierge service, you should be able to not just look at the assets, you can also access them and use them. And that's basically it. The idea really is to try to cut red tape, try to fasten the process that would help the access to data more streamlined and harmonized. And we are really pleased to see, therefore, the government announcing the creation of what is known as the Health Data Research Service last week in collaboration with Wellcome Trust, 600 million pounds of investment in Cambridge, completely driving at the right direction to deliver the ambitions that we have set out last year. So that gives an indication of potentially what one important aspect of what the National Data Library should be. It should have a strong service element, a concierge to help people to discover and use data in a trustful way, faster access. It will help people to use the data to deliver what's needed, rather than just let data to be staying in the form of information. We want insights. We want to turn insights into outcomes. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Henry. And a perspective from you, James, coming at this from a sort of data expert perspective in the private sector. What are your thoughts around what this National Data Library should be?
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, it's similar to what we see before, where there's lots of fragmented data sitting on old systems that are badly linked or are hard to access. And I think this is an initiative to try and break down some of those sort of historic barriers that have resulted in sort of fragmenting data or initiatives that have really not got off the ground or had much traction. I mean, ultimately, from my perspective at least, the ultimate outcome would be to have a sort of powerful, well-utilized resource that can then be deployed and easily accessible by lots of people and get some real sort of public sector value out of it, and that would be the result that I think most people would be looking for.
I'm going to come back to you in a second, James, because I'm really interested in this idea of how innovation can happen on the top of the National Data Library, what companies like yours might do to contribute to a National Data Library, because data doesn't valuable data or data that might be valuable to the community or to the population doesn't always necessarily come from the public sector alone. No. So I think we should maybe reflect on that a little bit in a question in a second. But Eleanor, I'd like to come to you and ask you for your thoughts in terms of what the ODI thinks the National Data Library should be.
Yes, I think my fellow panelists already gave you a very good background of what we know and what the government has said about the National Data Library so far. So I think maybe I will start by saying what the NDL shouldn't be. And the NDL shouldn't be a solution to all digital or data government problems. And there is a bit of a fear reading through the various white papers and the like, and the debate and discussion that has been put forward in the public domain so far, that it is seen as a panacea. And we know that we're still at scoping phase, but we need to be much more strategic and driven in those conversations to make sure that we start small and deliver impact quickly, because this is not the first time that public money has been spent on big data projects. We at the ODI have advocated for the importance of a national data infrastructure, a roadmap that looks at what the economy needs in terms of data, AI, and technology for the next decade and beyond. But that doesn't mean that we should be trying to solve everything at once. So even if we're talking about all the different domains that are currently being discussed in one form or another, if you think about all the different government agencies and data holders that would be involved, that's quite a challenge, not just for one parliament period, but for the next 20, 30 years. Now, there is hope. So one of the things that we've been thinking and writing about at the ODI in relation to the National Data Library is the role that artificial intelligence can play in changing how we do things, and changing what data can mean for the economy. So in a paper we have presented, I think in January, at a workshop organized by Wellcome and the ESRC, we have spoken about a number of key properties of the National Data Library. And those would be, in summary, federated access, so no centralized resource. Federated access means various things in terms of technologies and the openness and interoperability of those technologies, but also in terms of governance models and design. Interoperability, genuine interoperability at data and application level. AI readiness, I'm going to speak a little bit more about that in a second. But that user centricity is really important. So start with a compelling use case. Education was not an area we had initially suggested in our response to the AI action plan last year. But personally, I think it is very compelling. I have an academic background. It's very important. The public can relate to it. It can have huge impact on the economy, but also from a data stewardship and governance, data management point of view, it has many nice properties. So if the NDL were to grow out of that project and the related AI applications, that the DFE have funded, I think that could be potentially very interesting. One final thought on AI readiness. I think AI, the relationship between National Data Library and AI is multifaceted. On the one hand, you want those data sets and the tools to access them to be AI ready. And what that means isn't just data publishing, data access, data management, data governance as usual. It means providing specific mechanisms, whether technical or otherwise, to make sure that the data is available in the right formats, that it can be used efficiently by companies with various degrees of AI literacy and access to computational facilities. It also means that data needs to be assured and documented with respect to data qualities that are particularly important in AI, like how representative it is, how biased it is, how safe the development of AI applications that use that data could be. We at the ODI are going to be publishing an AI readiness framework in a few weeks, I think after Easter, if the weather plays nicely with us, where we hope to continue that conversation. And the second bit about AI really is that data work is tedious, but AI can make it interesting and accessible and scalable and more effective in all sorts of ways, say, from data prompting tools that enable civil servants to analyze very complex data sets without having that sort of specialist data science training. You could use large language models and similar models to facilitate data integration, which used to be a really tedious task that would take a lot of time and effort. You can generate synthetic data to get things off the ground and show the art of the possible. You could use federated learning and many other things. So actually, lots of the things that we know are hard now, with the responsible, wise use of AI, can unlock some of those conversations.
Excellent, thanks, Eleanor. I mean, I think the danger is, the phrase that I've used a few times about this project is let's not try and eat the whole bear. Because if we try and, implement something that is kind of pan public sector, pan government, tries to do everything all at once, then that surely will be a route to disaster. So I think those are very wise words on that particular point. So on that point, where do we start? What are the data sets that should be going into the National Data Library? We've talked a bit about education, we've talked a bit about health, but I wonder, just as a starting point, and I'm going to come to James on this question, it's a connected question, because I want to understand a little bit, there are a lot of private sector companies working in the data space in various different capacities. And I wonder what companies like yours could contribute to or gain from a national data library.
Thank you, Emma. It's a very good question. I think as an SME, we have some advantages possibly over kind of big tech companies like that who probably would look at something like the Ndl and maybe have a slightly different agenda to the agenda that everyone's working towards. They would probably look to centralize all of the data rather than it sitting in the situations and the places it is now and just having access. I'm sure they would probably look to pull that all together and create a centralized system. Obviously, the output of that could be that access that we would all like to be made available to everybody could then be sort of controlled and maybe offered to just a handful rather than the whole point behind the NDL. So, I think from saying that, the opposite way that it works for someone like Ovation or SME is that, as a small organisation, we're much quicker to react. We have the ability to adapt and be flexible. We're normally much more aligned with what the actual outcome of the project is or what our clients' particular needs are, which is good. We understand what they're trying to achieve and obviously can come up with a solution or adapt to accommodate that. we also tend to sort of specialize in more sort of niche markets and special sort of services. So as you know, we have lots of ability and expertise in data in general. We specialise at Ovation with oil and gas. So we've had quite an extensive experience in helping other companies try and navigate this sort of landscape where they want to get data sets into a state that they can use to use AI to make them help make better decisions, be quicker to the market. But the realization is that as much as everybody would like to get to a point where they can use AI and enhance the work that they're doing, lots of them are finding that the actual input to that has never really had the care and attention that's needed to be able to use the AI. So it's the buzzword. It's at all the conferences that we attend. It's on everybody. It's one of those things that comes up all the time. But the reality is, all the sort of hard work to get it into some uniform, clean state hasn't really happened yet in most cases. But saying that, there will be data sets that I'm sure are in a good state with the NDL that could probably quite quickly get brought in to sort of get back to what Elena was saying. I feel like there would need to be not necessarily some quick wins, but there would need to be something that could sort of be relayed back to the public to show that this is beneficial. This is some of the outcomes that we would have. And then that would get the sort of acceptance and buy-in and maybe navigate some of the other sort of viewpoints that the public might have about having all of their information sort of acceptable by and accessible by lots of different people at the same time.
Excellent. Thanks very much, James. I mean, I think that's this idea of having, starting with, to use a very happily overused phrase, low-hanging fruit where data is concerned, and then to build compelling use cases on top of that data could be one potential model that the architects of the NDL could follow. Anastasia, I'm really interested in your thoughts on this, whether you think that's a practical model. If it's not, please say why. If it is, then what would you recommend should be the data sets that go into the National Data Library?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And just to echo Elena, the government shouldn't be trying to do everything. And I think it's very important to be very clear-eyed about where government adds distinctive value versus where the private sector and others are better placed to lead. And the focus should be on where government really has unique capabilities and clear responsibilities and focus there. In our paper with the TBI, our position is that the main benefit of the NDL will be from linking of data across government silos and the use cases that derive from that. And at least in the first instance, the focus should be on administrative data generated through routine government operations. And the NDL is not starting from a blank page as well. And there are actually lots of things underway to help connect data across different silos in public sector. To name just a few, we have the ONS Integrated Data Service, the ESRC Administrative Data Research UK initiative. Then we have the Geospatial Commission's National Underground Asset Register, and all kinds of data sharing agreements between individual departments. And all this offers the NDL a wonderful starting point. And the NDL's role really should not be to duplicate commercial or research efforts, but to unlock the value of this data by addressing these structural, technical, and also legal barriers that we have mentioned earlier.
Excellent. Thanks, Anastasia. Henry, a view from your expertise, please.
I would just echo the points that Anastasia is making, and I would not add too much at this point. Okay,
Eleanor, I'm sure you have something to offer in terms of the data sets we should be starting with and where that rich seam of use cases might come from.
So we at the ODI have spoken last year. We started thinking about this, and essentially we came up with a number of principles that would allow an MVP of the National Data Library to be realized fairly quickly. I absolutely agree with what Anastasia was saying about being extremely aware and leveraging existing mechanisms we have for accessing and assuring as well data. At the end of the day, I think there will be a decision to start somewhere, but I think what could potentially differentiate from the National Data Library from other projects is a way to do things. That national data infrastructure built on those principles that would allow for new data sources to be added, to be accessed, to be exploited for the next 5, 10, 20 years. So it is important to show value for the public investment that was made. I think what I liked specifically, the reasons why we had mentioned 3 domains in the original writing we have done in September last year was because it would bring together high quality public data, open government data, for which there has been substantial investment from taxpayers' money over the last decade. And it is data that can be accessed. The technology is quite mature. There's a plethora of data sets at different administrative levels that in fact could use with more success stories and being brought back to public consciousness, because it is an amazing success story of the UK and UK government. We said health, but actually what we said is data that is sensitive and accessible only in trusted research environment, only to be able to build that technical and governance mechanisms to be able to access to those types of environments in a federated setting. And then the cultural heritage, and we were very pleased to see some of those ideas. The reason for that is because that's an essential industry for the UK, and we have seen the copyright discussions in January resurfacing some of that, and because of the role that data can so it is valuable data for different reasons than, say, data that would sit in a trusted research or execution environment. Now, what I like about education is, first of all, it is something that everyone can identify in education by pupils, by teachers, by administrators. There's a lot of hype and misunderstandings around it. So a project that would work in that space to use that technology responsibly, but to also ensure that we reap the benefits of using it in a very important societal sector is interesting. Then the way the whole initiative has been constructed, I think, is very positive. On the one hand, we at the ODI really appreciate the attention to data. Very often you would see initiatives that say, oh, let's build tools, and then 3 months down the line, negotiating access to data. So the data is just as important as the applications, but at the same time, it is not just the data. So you don't have just the content hub. You have these 13, 16 projects that are building that community to make sure that that data is used. So those types of design principles of the initiatives, I think, should be replicated in the National Data Library as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Eleanor. Before we go on, could I just please ask our panelists, we seem to be encountering some Wi-Fi issues here in the ODI office. I just want to make sure that you're all okay and you can still see and hear everybody fine, because actually me being able to hear and see you is slightly irrelevant, as long as you can hear hear and see each other. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Eleanor. Some very positive thoughts there, I thought, of this working. One of the things that, again, I do worry about is that we have, it feels to me that there's a latency around data readiness or a strategic approach to implementation. That we're just trying to catch up with now, and we're trying to catch up with so many things simultaneously, because obviously, we've got the data use and access bill going through Parliament. There's a big chunk of content there that relates to smart, to more widely, to benefit more consumers. We've got the National Data Library in train. We've got all of the steps that were set out in Matt Clifford's AI Opportunities Action Plan. There's a huge amount going on. To me, one of the potential barriers is, again, that we try to do too much simultaneously. But I wonder, panelists, from your perspective, what you think the kind of the main sticking points, barriers, the things that might get in the way of our success might be here. And I'm going to go in the same order again. And Anastasia, I'm going to come to you first. And then I think once we tackle this topic, we've got quite a lot of questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to go over to the audience.
That's a large question. There are a large number of choices that will need to be made about its institutional setup. There will be challenges around the technical architecture choices, capabilities, data governance, state capacity to ensure it can actually deliver on its potential at scale. And there are all sorts of technical, legal, trust, funding, and user considerations that need answers for the successful design of this initiative. But just to go through a couple, and I'm sure others will complement this, I think first, we need to acknowledge that data remains locked in silos due to fragmented information governance frameworks. And in our paper, we recommended to establish a single data access committee with delegated authority from departmental committees, eliminating the duplication and inconsistency that currently create unnecessary delays. And the goal would be to radically speed up access, processing all data requests in a very short time frame, we said in the paper, within 2 weeks of submission, through a system that adapts the approval process based on who's requesting the data and what they are requesting. So I think to accelerate this process would be a huge win already. There is also a degree of risk aversion to data sharing in departments, which is understandable given the complexity of the law and the penalties for getting things wrong. And to address this, we suggested in the paper that the government should establish an indemnity scheme for data controllers, and this would encourage departments to share data for linkage, reducing hesitancy, and ensuring that more consistent data is available. There are also other considerations related to state capacity. We in the paper proposed to create a network of national data librarians, which are the servants that will be embedded within government departments and other relevant public bodies for effective coordination. And those people would be responsible for driving data quality, integration, usability, while also ensuring that the NDL meets user needs in government and also outside the government. Because especially I think when it comes to the benefit to third-party users in academia and industry, it's very easy to get the NDL disconnected from the actual needs of those potential users who will be the ones driving that economic growth that the NDL would facilitate. And so among other functions, we thought that it would be very useful for those national data librarians to act as bridges between data controllers and external users. So as they would be improving data quality, enhancing usability, but also aligning. So we thought that would really make a difference. So there is also another additional recommendation that we discussed, and this was a metadata catalog that would function like a library index, allowing people to efficiently discover and understand available datasets through a simple search interface, because as it stands, sometimes it's very complicated to actually understand what data is available in what formats. And we thought that this could also help tackle that challenge.
Excellent. So you've come up not just with barriers, Anastasia, but solutions to those barriers. So I like that, very positive. So James, from your point of view, what are the things that could potentially get in the way, prevent the National Data Library providing the utility that you as a private sector business might want to see?
Thank you. I mean, I agree completely with Anastasia and the points that she raised. I think there's a couple more that I would probably add to. I think security obviously is going to be a big one. Controlling access and the vulnerability of the data existence to change. You know, if these are sort of a new initiative, you know, is everybody going to be on board? You know, walking away from traditional systems into sort of digital libraries is a new thing for lots of people. You know, do they believe in it? And I think the last one really is just the sort of the public trust almost. You know, there's been lots of things published earlier in the year that essentially say that, you know, the public in general don't necessarily believe what they're being told, that they fear the government's lying to them at some level, or society in general is lying to them. And I wonder if lots of the general public, you know, understand some of the advantages they can get from AI. And I'm sure lots of them are probably suspicious to a certain level of what that AI model or the system or the NDL can do when it has access to everybody's data. I think they're going to be the big barriers that I would envision.
So interesting, James. It's particularly interesting. I think this is the first time that the sort of trust and culture pieces have been mentioned in the conversation, but they are, of course, so important. I was very struck by a piece of research done by the Lloyd's Register Foundation, and they did they had an overall percentage measure of the public's trust globally in government as custodians of data, and it was something crazy like 11%. Only 11% of citizens trust governments globally with their data. There are other metrics out there which put it higher than that for the UK, which you might expect, but it still is very, very definitely an issue that we need to be thinking about, as well as the technologies and the AI readiness of our data. So I'm going to come really briefly to you, Henry, and then to Eleanor, and then we're going to go to the audience's questions. So Henry, Barry.
Thank you, Emma. So first point to reiterate very strongly is James's point on public trust. This is a really, really important point, especially for health data. I don't need to explain why that is the case, given previous mishaps about care.data, GDPR, that sort of thing. So in any case, whatever service that should be developed, like the Health Data Research Service, the public should be co-designing the service, co-creating the service at the beginning. To that end, NHS England, ourselves, TBI, we've been consulting. When we develop proposals, we always consult deeply, widely with people who understand public's concern, charity sector, to make sure that that is completely addressed. And that is why we are so happy to see the government working with Wellcome Trust, who commands a lot of expertise and trust in this area to build this service. And secondly, once we can get the public trust question right, the second question that we need to be really concerned about is funding. It is a really real question given the fiscal climate, given the fact that this is basically the basis for any sort of tangible delivery capacity that we need to talk about for the function that a Health Data Research Service or NDL will need to perform. And funding for the health data landscape has been very, it has not been as sustainable as it could optimally be. Let's put it that way. There is a bit of a hand-to-mouth approach at the moment. Every year, the funding is renewed once, for example, for the SDA program, and the funding amount is needs to be consistent with the ambition. They may not be consistent with ambition all the time, given the challenges in the physical climate. And that poses a big challenge, and that is why political commitment is important. And that is also why we are very, very happy to see Wellcome Trust supporting this initiative with £600 million of funding. But then we can't rely on charity endeavors or public funding alone. That is important, but that's not enough, because in our extensive consultation with trusted users and who will use the service ultimately, the service that we want to create, either with HDRs or NDL, is to help people use the data. And at the same time, from the government point of view, from the public point of view, we want to ensure that there's value flowing back to the system. There should be a commercial element to it when it comes to people using it. Okay, if you use it, then we generate a value. We know about the ecosystem value for sure, but there needs to be something tangible. And in order to create that value proposition, the HDRS or whatever similar service in NDL needs to be very commercially minded. And that is why it's important to realize that public benefit and commercial benefit in this context is two sides of the same coin. And in order for it to be commercially viable, we did actually a little bit of work to understand what might be the feasible commercial investment models for the possible HDRS over the past few months. And it is clear from the industry's indication that they would like to see government having a very strong commitment at the beginning, which we are now seeing through Wellcome Trust now. So that's important. Without that, industry is going to be quite hesitant to invest or use the service. And in terms of the viable funding model, the industry sees that service and access fees would be the most tangible model to start with. To Eleanor's point, it's important to build out an MVP of the service. And in the health context, stakeholders told us that if we can get it right, it being linking primary care, secondary care, prescription and death data, get that going for a start and plug other stuff in from SDEs. If you can get that right, industry can see a feasible model of usage. They can see that if we pay this amount of money, they can get what they want to do what they need to drive innovations in pharmaceuticals, medical devices. Then that would be a start for the industry to have more confidence in using the data, for the public side to public sector side to understand the demand better and how they need to deliver the service better and how they need to curate the data better. So that would be a starting point: service and access fees. There are some other slightly fancier ways of capturing public value, for example, having a royalty share, but it is a very complicated model because administering this model would take quite a lot of work, and it's quite hard to track and attribute causation when it comes to, oh, I use this data and develop this drug, and hence you need to have a percentage of clawback. That's quite hard to work out and difficult to do. But then at the same time, industry is very open to partnerships, building with the public sector data sets that would create joint benefit. So once the service and access fees model is up and running, demonstrating feasibility, industry would be potentially very open to working with the public sector to create dedicated data sets. And that's another way to crowd in more private investment to make this more sustainable. So I'll leave it there at the
Henry,
moment.
I was just going to say,
points.
I'm just going to, because I do want to get to some audience questions, and Eleanor hasn't had a chance to comment on the barriers piece, but actually you segued really neatly into one of the audience questions. So Eleanor, because I know you're very skilled at this, I'd like you to wrap together, please, your reflections on barriers with this piece around funding. So an audience member has asked, is the funding already in place to secure the National Data Library beyond the next Parliament? Otherwise, it risks being cut or deprioritised with a change of government. And I guess the view on this depends on like the business model. that is chosen, to Henry's points there. So if you could maybe reflect on that a little bit, but also if you have any comments on the barriers, any additional barriers that you might perceive, that would be really good. And then I'm going to ask the next set of we've had loads of questions actually. We're probably not going to get to them all. We've also had a lot of comments in the chat. So I think what we'll probably do is we'll wrap all the comments in the chat together and share them with you as panelists after the event. But if you could address that one first, and then I'll wrap a few of the other questions up together for everybody else to respond.
So I'll be very brief so that we can go through the questions from the audience as well. I think the National Data Library has to be, and the resources in that library have to be used from day one. The biggest barrier is that we do what we have done before and focus on publishing and access and governance first. So we work with the data holders, and at some point down the line, we bring the users in. I would not look at any vertical or data source without a very specific use case in mind, without having clear commitment from data users that they want that data and will use it. And that has many benefits for data quality and other benefits demonstrating the value, the impact, and so on that the ODI has written extensively on. And I think the other thing that we need to, the other barrier is that this is seen as a project, an initiative that is not serving public benefit. And I was actually reflecting as my colleagues were discussing about the barriers, whether the vision really is to turn the National Data Library into a public asset with similar recognition value as, I don't know, the British Library, the National Health Service. Data is not something that you usually talk about, but we at the ODI genuinely believe that the public, everyone on the street, should be more aware of the opportunities that their data and data in general can have. So if the vision really is to have the NDL at the same sort of level as, I don't know, TNGB in terms of recognition and national pride, then we really need to be careful to make sure that the use cases that we're picking serve society. We need to be fairly cautious about using phrases like commercially minded. I would be very comfortable with usage minded and focusing on use from day one. We've seen many examples where focusing too much on commercial aspects could have unintended consequences. And I would very much recommend everyone to have a look at the report that Jenny Tennyson has published recently for the Benefit Institute that goes through a number of possible models as well, complementing what Henry and the Tony Blair Institute have said on that matter. What I wouldn't want to see as well is some version of the NDL all of a sudden landing in someone's foundational model, used for so-called AI innovation purposes, for some intangible, unspecified public benefit. Because technically, once data has been ingested in one of these systems, you can't just take it out. You have to start from scratch. I think that would be a complete disaster, to be honest. So we need to tread really carefully, and we need to have public trust and societally beneficial use of this data in place from day one.
Excellent. Eleanor, thank you. Okay, so slight change of plan, gang. I'm sure you're fine with this. Anastasia, I know you wanted to come in on the point about the sustainability beyond the this Parliament. James, so I'm going to come to you after Anastasia. We've had a question about compliance, which I think maybe if you could have a think about. So compliance is a massive issue that we've seen in oil and gas data initiatives, especially on legacy data. Who pays for remastering old data going into the National Data Library? And from that, how should the government increase compliance? Because it's a big bill, it's a large cost. So maybe if you could have a little think about that. And then Henry, I'm going to give you the last word, or possibly even Eleanor, if we've got 30 seconds at the end. How will National Data Library ensure that sensitive UK data, especially if it will include NHS data sets, is protected from foreign access or misuse? Should safeguarding of data be in the conversation, which I guess speaks a little bit to what Eleanor was just talking about. So Anastasia, if you want to come in on that longevity first.
Yes, a fascinating question from the audience on ensuring the sustainability of the National Data Library beyond this Parliament. I think it's a very important one because the NDL's status as a manifesto commitment by the current government signals strong political will, which is great, but it also creates risk because without firm legal foundations and demonstrated value, a change in government could cause the NDL to be deprioritized or even cancelled. So to ensure long-term certainty, stability, and cross-government adoption, it must be protected from political cycles and ad hoc decision-making, as it often happens. So a clear statutory basis, we think, would guarantee its role as a long-term public asset, ensuring sustained funding and operational independence. So in our paper with the TBI, we recommended that the government should put the NDL on a statutory footing and transition it into an arm's length body sponsored by DCIT through a new Act of Parliament. And after the initial incubation period with DCIT, in coordination with other departments and relevant public bodies, DCIT would lead the drafting of this comprehensive NDL bill. And this legislation would also address outstanding legal and governance issues. Because
Anastasia, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you there because we do only have now 4 minutes left. I want to give James time to answer on this question about compliance and the remastering of data and making sure that is supported financially. The legacy data piece, James.
No problem, thank you. So from an oil and gas point of view, the government set out as part of the NSTA quite a rigid set of standards that you have to adhere to. That those obviously are more new terms and new standards as opposed to old historic legacy standards. And obviously when the data was originally created some time ago, that there wasn't the thought that in years to come it would have to meet a certain type of standard to be absorbed in. So as I said, there is a set of standards that you have to adhere to. Currently, to meet those, the operator covers the cost of doing any conversion, metadata enhancement, or anything like that. And then during the kind of submission stage, there's a tool that you have to use, and that tool basically validates that you've met the criteria of what the government has set out. And if you don't, it gives you some guidelines of where you're missing the criteria that's required, and obviously you can go away and spend some more time enhancing the data.
Yes, that's the process, but compliance is an issue, isn't it? I think that's a whole other webinar. Is like, the incentives, because the fines aren't enormous if people don't actually comply to that process. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that right now because I do want to get to you, Henry. And just ask you a really current question about how we protect the UK's data, particularly data about its citizens, from bad actors internationally or misuse by others. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that safeguarding piece.
Awesome. I will provide a response to this, and one additional quick point. Response to it is that UK is doing very well in terms of safeguarding health data, and that's why, say, the secure data environments are created. The Health Data Research Service is basically a service layer building on top of that, and it would have the same level of safeguard. And that's basically the response to the question. We are not changing anything at all with the proposal, and the government's new initiative is completely building on existing progress. And the additional point to Eleanor's insight, which I find extremely useful, is that by way of background, I'm actually I used to work for Professor Mariana Mazzucato at the University of College London. I basically built out all the thinking in health, innovation, and access to medicine based on entrepreneurial state. And ultimately, the most radical and practical part of this proposal of HTRS is that this is a commercially minded entity for the public. Like, it's run like a commercial entity, it's owned by the government, and it delivers commercial value for the citizens. So completely agree with Eleanor's point. This cannot be serving private interest for private interest's sake. And ultimately, we want this to benefit the citizen and the artist.
I think it's a wonderful place to finish. Sorry, we have absolutely run out of time. This has been a fascinating panel. We have another panel on the National Data, related to National Data Library, particularly looking at heritage data. I'm looking at Joe, I think that's coming up in June. My colleague Joe is sitting in the room with me. So please do join us for that one. But just for now, I'd like to thank Anastasia, James, Henry, and Eleanor for a really fantastic chat, and to you, the audience, as well, for being so engaged. I'm so sorry we didn't get to all your questions and comments, but we will make sure that they reach the panelists. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.